All right, so we're talking about AMRAPs today. We were talking about squat, bench, and deadlift and how it applies to beginners, intermediates, and advanced level lifters. We'll talk about point by point. I think more or less deadlifts are going to have less use in an AMRAP kind of scheme for almost everybody. The reason why, we'll talk more about it, but a lot of times deadlift is a very, very, very skill-based lift. Especially sumo deadlift, when you do more reps with something or you are so focused on getting X amount of reps that a lot of times the technique gets thrown out the window. It's easier, I would say, out in my experience coaching and lifting, that is very common in deadlift, but squat and bench, it's easier to keep that reined in. It's easier to stay 100% in line and not make a tiny mistake, where it's going to cost you more on a deadlift than squat and bench. Bench probably a little bit more, but the fact that it's more of an upper body type lift, with it being very easy to control still, versus deadlift, it's easy for a rep to roll in front of you or get out ahead of you, and you lose a lot of positioning, and you go from having 100% strength for that rep to 70%. You can't even break the bar off the floor with something that normally is easy, rep work, right? That's one reason. But let's talk about as it is to beginners. Beginners, you'll see this in a lot of club type powerlifting, university type setups, where they give a cookie cutter program to somebody, and everybody has 5 sets of 4 at 75% or 76%, whatever percent, and then they have a plus set afterwards. One set capped at maybe 10 reps, or maybe capped at, I don't know, at a 9.5 RPE or 9 RPE, something like that, which most people take to at 10, right? So no reps left in the tank. A lot of times we see good use out of that for beginners, right? Why? Because beginners make such easy linear adaptations week to week, session to session almost, that it's so easy to just add on another 2.5 pounds, 5 pounds. They're building muscle very quickly, way more quickly than a high level lifter or an intermediate even. They're doing it so fast that it's just very, very natural. The problem only becomes, if you're such a beginner that you're having trouble keeping, technique the same from session to session, or you're changing too many things with your technique. All those kinds of things can throw you off. And so for that reason, I would not recommend that to beginners. But otherwise, they're a very good tool that can be used, once a week, maybe for bursts, and we'll talk more about this for intermediates and advanced level lifters, or more bursts or longer bursts or longer streaks than intermediates and advanced, because of the fact that it is so low absolute weight that they're doing, and they don't have as much wear as they do as intermediates or advanced level lifters do have. In powerlifting, right? When we're talking about powerlifting cycles, for a meet in 12 weeks, we don't have to necessarily be strong 12 weeks out. We need to be very strong 4 weeks out, 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, all the way to the meet. That is what's most important. So there are times in training where it isn't inherently a great idea to be going balls to the wall as extreme as you can on building that top end level of strength with, a sub% weight, right? We don't have to necessarily be that push that hard. To have it be effective for intermediates or beginners, we want to be kind of pushing the envelope more often than not, if they are able to sustain that, right? So something like once a week, after volume sets on one of the priority type days. We'll talk about acute fatigue in another training video, or another video that I'll do. But basically assigning one specific day that is more taxing or planned to be more taxing can be effective for beginners. They get more time to recoup. and a lot of times their frequency is already so low in the first place that they can manage something like that. So I like it for them, and you'll see a lot of good use out of that for beginners. Just make sure that their technique is consistent from session to session, and we're not in the middle of changing anything around. So beginners are good for squat. Bench, it's basically the same here. A lot of times bench is much easier to recover from. The problem here is for beginners, their technique usually isn't that great. So something like more of a very highly controlled exercise, like say for example, a paused 3-count pause, even close grip, or something that's a little bit less weight, so something that's self-restricting, can be good for an AMRAP type set like that. I think it's very effective in those cases. So I think that's all I want to talk about for the beginner as far as that goes. The deadlift here, I do not really like it. There's it kind of to the same point of squat and bench, where we're trying to be so dialed in on technique, and deadlift is one that is very, very few beginners have great deadlift technique, and it can almost separate you. If you're a beginner that has really great deadlift technique, very great sumo technique, your deadlift's gonna come up quick, and you're probably getting out of that range of being a very, textbook type beginner, and you're probably more of an intermediate at that point, usually. So I think that is also, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that is a good difference maker that can define somebody, because I know there's very few great deadlifters that you can see them as a beginner, and it's not usually the case. So for that reason, deadlifts are out for beginners. But intermediates, this is something that I like, and I have used this in the past. I think once you get the technique down on a lot of the 3 lifts, this is something where it can be very effective, like I said, in dosages or in bursts. Closing into a meet, and you want to get a lot out of a little bit less overall volume, that is a great way. Because say for example you're doing something like a daily undulating scheme, and you have 3 days a week of squats, and one day you're doing 4x2, one day you're doing 5x3, and then one day you have a plus set after 3 sets of 5. Could be anything, right? But in that case, the overall volume isn't that high. We can get a lot of good stimulus effect from the higher percentages, but also that one session does have significant volume, and we can keep that trend up where one day is more of a priority type day. There are different ways to look at it, but for an intermediate, they can make, if they have a lot of the muscle that's already associated with being closer to an intermediate level lifter, they can get good use out of, especially on squat. There's ranges where, as an intermediate level lifter, the amount of muscle that you have probably doesn't indicate what your current strength level is at. So say where if you have the muscle to squat 500 pounds for reps, but you don't have the adaptation for that, that is something where it can be very effective, just from the sake that you haven't pushed your neurological type gains into that range. So for that reason, I think it's very good for squat, and I think that example should help. Bench, this is more of the, it depends if you're an intermediate, advanced level lifter. I'm sorry, if you are a more highly technical or refined level bench presser as an intermediate, that is something that's very effective. If you're not there yet and you still have good overall bench strength, that's something where once you develop that technique, I think that will push you into that range where you're an advanced level lifter. So it's tough to for sure recommend that there, but there are cases, in training where if you have an athlete that's really developing, an arch, you have them working on getting the mobility for that, and they're practicing, and say for example and they're trying to work on the technical proficiency, and you see it improving, that can be an opportunity to try that out. Or the deadlift as an intermediate level lifter should be used very sparingly, if at all, and I would say more so on conventional here, because you probably at an intermediate level already have a good hold on your deadlift technique if you're pulling conventional. Sumo, I'd probably still stay away from this, but conventional can be very effective. There becomes a point with conventional deadlifts and AMRAPs that you have a very high chance of straining an erector, even if it's not something that's very serious, but can delay your training a little bit. And this is kind of where we're talking about where AMRAPs are almost not worth it, in the sense that if there is an injury risk or high risk of injury with specific movements, I think, and certain athletes have, already an affinity or disposition to be injured on specific things. I hate using the term that someone is inherently predisposed to getting injured. There are examples of it, and you've got to know that with yourself. You got to know if you're a little bit more durable. You've got to know that you can push to X or B and still be fine. The problem is if we're saying that, hey, I had this on my story yesterday, I think. Is something inherently dangerous, or is this a safe movement? No movement is really that safe. No matter what, if you're lifting 300 pounds on your back, doesn't matter if you squat 900 pounds, putting that much weight on your back, moving, unracking, re-racking, you have a risk for injury with that, no matter what. Is it probably that severe? No, maybe not. But as you get stronger, there is always a greater risk. No matter what your body can do or what you have the musculature to do, the absolute weight is still absolute weight. You don't change that. There are a lot of ways to get hurt. Powerlifting that isn't inherently a complete max, or maybe it's under the volume range that you were capable of, right? If you can squat 405 for 20 reps, doing 15 you still may have 5 reps left in the tank, right? So the RPE isn't that high, in quotes, right? But the more movements you do, the more you actually have to screw up. All of these things can be factored in. So I hate to say that something is inherently dangerous, because all of it is dangerous. But there are people that are more prone to being injured in something where it is an all-out RPE 9.5, 10. Probably not the best move, but also in the same note, if we're looking into RPE and you have someone do a set of 5 at 9, is that really that much different than 9.5 or capped RPE? If you had them do a set of 6, at 8 or at 9, would it be really that much different than you doing 85%, for an AMRAP set? Maybe not. Maybe if you capped it, maybe not. There are definitely athletes that I know of, and I'm not saying any names, that I know do AMRAPs that have been hurt or can get hurt. But all at the same time, I've injured myself re-racking, squat countless times. Countless times have I known that I've tweaked, my erector or glute or anything like that, more or less my back, re-racking the bar or twisting into the rack, or one side of the spotters kind of grab it and the other one doesn't, and I twist like this. That's very risky, but it's powerlifting. This isn't, something that it's safe. It's not safe at all. And people make fun of and, say, oh, well, you're powerlifting, see me in 25 days or 25 years when you need new knees and new back and all those kinds of things. People say that for a reason, whether it's a true stereotype or not, but all of these types of things are said. So with AMRAPs, you've got to be bursty with them, right? Like I like using them in spurts when it's closer to a meet, and this is something manageable with an athlete that can do it. You know, if you're squatting 3 times a week, 2 days are kind of relatively not aggressive, and one is, that one day can be more be the primary focus day, then it's a good option. So let's get into the advanced level lifters, because this is I think the most talked about from coaches, because we see, you know, high level lifters, myself, I think maybe Amanda, I think maybe Sean, I think of lifters like that are doing a lot of work, that are, you know, really like the hustling type lifters that are posting a lot, or just doing a lot of volume, right? A lot of them, or that are doing intense volume, right? That would be more of the point here. Some of us, you don't want to increase the risk, right? For us, we're already doing such extreme loads or volume or intensity that pushing that envelope that much more, even though inherently, right, for beginners, intermediates, it's not that much more, but we're already at that threshold. That is the lifter that it's like, okay, is it really worth it? I don't necessarily know. Sometimes maybe, right? And I'll make the point for this video that sometimes it can be worth doing, even if it's a cap AMRAP. You don't have to fail, right? I would like to make that difference, because going to failure versus an AMRAP set, I think, can be different. We can do an AMRAP set capped at RP 9 or capped at 10 reps and kind of call that an AMRAP. But in your head, if you do a set at 90%, something that maybe you could do for 3, 4, 5 reps, maybe, depending on the lifter, probably more females there, they can do that. When you frame it that way in your head, that also makes a difference too. Let me get back on track with the advanced level lifters. So for squat, right? Squat, I personally would do this more. I just haven't. You know, I work with a coach. You know, so sometimes they have me do something else. Eric Bodhorn helps me do something else. Or, you know, in my case, if sometimes I want to do that on my own, then that would be an opportunity there. I think for me personally, I do well with high rep squats. You know, I've done the squat challenge. Stuff like that is not a big deal to me. I can repeatedly go week to week and know that I can be fine. I'm smart with it. I'm not pushing till I completely fail. I know when to hold off and when to pull, to go or to push on the pedal. It is specifically the lifter there. Every single lifter needs to be able to know one way or the other. You know, you have to be able to say, I know myself well enough that I can do it or not. And that's also what defines an advanced level lifter. That's for squat. I think bench, as an advanced level lifter, I think this is one of the most underutilized ones. I think as an advanced level bench presser or advanced level lifter that bench presses something with great technique, those athletes, those should really be using AMRAP sets very often. I think almost more frequently than any other, you know, beginner, intermediate, any other one, because their technique's so good. They can keep a lot of the stress off their shoulders. They recover so fast from session to session that it's so effective there. And I think that is something that I would like to see more. I think Sean uses those. Don't quote me on that, but I think that is a great example. So deadlift, this, I have a hard time recommending this to anybody, simply because the breakdown we're doing at an advanced level lifter, you're doing so much overall weight with so much intensity, with so much volume, right? Like if you deadlift 700 pounds, chances are you could deadlift 600 for 5 or 6 reps, you know, at least at an AMRAP set. That is a lot of toll to do for maybe not the reward it's worth. You're getting into the point of diminishing returns there. So for that reason, it's very tough to recommend, even for conventional or sumo. Sumo is more where you can handle a little bit more depending on the lifter. You probably could get away with it as far as musculature or recovery speaking in that sense. But for your joints, it is a little bit more difficult, depending on the person. And I would, again, go back to more of the technical side of things breaking down, that it may not be worth it for those. So I don't want to go on too much more. I think this covers mostly it. But yeah, I'm going to post another poll on my story and get the next topic for my next video. So hopefully you liked it. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly, but I think I covered a lot, and I think there's some good stuff to take away from here. So, all right, thanks.